Hi, this is Mark, and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. Today, I want to talk about global strategy. Now, in order to introduce this topic, I want to talk about a company called Jollibee. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. They are the #1 fast food restaurant in the Philippines. When I was in the Philippines, I ate there. It's a great place. USA Today called its Chicken Joy the best fast food fried chicken in the world, and so it is rising in the ranks. What's interesting, though, isn't just that it's this great Filipino fast food chain, but it's actually bigger than all of the other fast food chains in the Philippines. That is, small startup is beating McDonald's. Crazy, huh? And they have presence in 17 countries right now. And so one might ask the question, how did they get there? Why? How does that work? And so that's what I want to explore a little bit as we get into this discussion of global strategy, starting with Jollibee as an example, but then talking more broadly about other brands and what companies have to think about as they enter foreign markets. All right, before we elaborate more on Jollibee, I want to remind you to please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below too if you have questions, things you want to talk about, and likewise, please share it if you think it's something that other people would get some value out of. Let's get back into Jollibee. We've already talked about basically where it came from and how it's become so prominent. It's like the second most fastest growing brand in the world as well. So that's a lot. That's a lot of progress for what was originally a small startup in the Philippines. So how did it do so well in the Philippines? So if you're McDonald's or Taco Bell or KFC, you might want to adjust your menu a little bit based on local tastes in order to try to sell more. I mean, McDonald's, as we talked about before, did massive changes in their menu when they entered into India. Well, with Jollibee, coming from the Philippines, they're not thinking about changing. They're thinking about wholesale appeal to what is a family-oriented market, a demographic of people that want to go out to dinner, and maybe they want a lot of different kinds of food, and it's deliberately trying to appeal to that Filipino palate. And it worked great. And in fact, it did so well that there's a lot of loyalty. Like, Filipinos are proud of the fact that this business has done so well and expanded overseas, and they continue to support it and consistently choose it over other brands. So that kind of talks a little bit about domestic expansion, at least in a nutshell. There's probably more to it than that, but at least in terms of a strategic sense, in terms of what they want to do with their product, that essentially is what it was. The question is, why is this little Filipino place that sells Filipino food, how did it get so big in other parts of the world? And the answer to that question is a little bit more complicated. If you look at, say, menus in Vietnam, for example, which they have a presence in certain places in Southeast Asia, you look at that menu, you'll see that some of the menu is the same, but some of the way that they are approaching it and the way that they've changed the menu is significantly different. Like most of the Filipino food, if you look at their menu, it's not super spicy, it's sort of middle of the road kind of stuff. Well, you go to Vietnam and you start seeing more rice, more peppers, spicier offerings, things that would appeal more to that market. And so just as companies like McDonald's have come to different countries and changed their menu a little bit, Jollibee did the same thing when they go to Vietnam. However, if you look at the menu in the United States, yes, they have some restaurants in the United States, particularly with a strong presence over on the West Coast. You'll find that menu is very similar to the Filipino menu. Now, there are some changes, but a lot of it is significantly the same. And so I like to ask my students why. Why is that, right? Well, I think one of the answers is that there is a strong expatriate Filipino community over on the West Coast of the United States. People who, again, they want a taste of home, and it benefits them to not change anything. And so in this way, what they are doing is they're saying, okay, we come to one country and we're going to adjust our menu. We're going to adjust the way that we're selling things. in another country, we're going to keep things the same because that seems to benefit us the most. So I think that the Jollibee case study illustrates some of the tensions that we're going to be talking about when we start thinking about strategy when we expand overseas. There's a fundamental tension between what's known as a globalization approach versus a national responsiveness approach. So with national responsiveness, it's the need to understand different consumer tastes in segmented regional markets, respond to different national standards and regulations imposed by autonomous governments and agencies. And so the idea is when you're pursuing a national responsive strategy, right, you're trying to figure out what is it that people want locally. How can I change whatever I'm doing in order to appeal those people and gain more market in that way? And the other one is global integration. Production and distribution of products and services of a homogeneous type and quality on a worldwide basis. That is, let's change as little of everything as we possibly can in an effort to try to make money and be more efficient. Anybody heard of Jollibee before? They probably know that they can't compete with McDonald's head to head, sort of the small guy taking on the giant. But a great way to get a foothold is to take what you're doing and just, as we've said before with exporting, it's almost like an export. You just take it and you move it someplace else. You do the same thing and you find people who will like you exactly as you are, and then you don't have to change that much. There is a strong connection between this brand and the Filipino people. And it is not at all surprising that most of your locations are going to be where Filipino expatriates are going to live. So they have capitalized on the fact that there's a large expatriate community out there and they can sell stuff to that community. Does that mean that they change what they do or they keep it the same?
Keep it the same.
They're going to keep it the same, at least among these Filipino communities. Now, what about the Middle East? I'll just tell you that there's lots of Filipinos in the Middle East that are hired as contract workers to go work on oil wells and things like that. And so there's a strong Filipino presence there as well. Obviously, there's some tension here. You know, you go to the local needs and demand side, and it's more expensive to do that. You may have to change things. You may have to do things differently in multiple locations, right? And the opposite is that, well, you don't have to change that much. It's not very expensive, but are you going to reach all the markets you want to reach if you don't change anything? So some examples, right? Local responsiveness, right? You tailor your product and service offerings to fit the local consumer preferences and host country requirements. You know, and we talked earlier about McDonald's using mutton in India, perfect example of being locally responsive. And then there's cost reduction strategies, right? Multinational enterprises enter global marketplace with the intention to reduce operation costs. And Toyota Prius is a good example of that, right? You've got common components, more new models, fewer platforms. The world is moving towards global markets, but standardization is generally not possible across the board. As long as you've got different people, different cultures, different preferences, as long as you have different economic differences between countries, as long as you have trade barriers, and even at a basic technical level, as long as there's differences between product and technical standards, then you're not going to get to globalize everything, right? There's always going to be different ways that you may have to approach your strategy when it comes to your business. Well, I want to show you a framework, an integration responsiveness framework, and give you some examples of how this works, how certain companies have done this. We have basically two lines, and we've created a quadrant. At the top of this vertical continuum, you have high pressure for cost reductions. That is, these are going to be businesses where you want to try to keep costs as low as you possibly can. Down at the bottom, on this end, there's not very much pressure for low cost. You know, you can charge more. The people don't care as much, right? You know, I'm going to buy Apple because I'm going to buy Apple, and I don't care if it's expensive or not because I love Apple, right? So that's low pressure for cost reductions. On the left side of the continuum, on the horizontal, low pressure for local responsiveness. That is, we don't have to change anything in order to make it work. Then over here, high pressure for local responsiveness. That is, we might have to change quite a bit in order to make it work. And among those four directions, you have four quadrants, and the different strategies that you have to pursue or you may pursue in order to be successful. Let's start with international strategy. It's domestically focused. You can export a few domestically produced products to selected countries. They've got Harley Davidson, Rolex, Starbucks listed here. Probably pretty obvious choices. I mean, with Starbucks, do the restaurant the same way, do the coffee the same way. People are going to like it exactly as it is. It's in high demand the way it is. You're not going to have to mess with it, right? I chose Harley Davidson, I think, as really being an exemplar for that. You know, people want, when they want a Harley Davidson, they know what that means, and they don't want it different. They just want it to be that way. And so when that's the case, you know, it's an easy sell. What that means is that they don't have to change things, they don't have to be locally responsive, and price doesn't really matter. People will pay an arm and a leg for a Harley just to get whatever it is that they want. Starbucks can charge more. Rolex can charge more, right? Those name brands. So you don't really have to do that much different. The next one we'll talk about here is this localization strategy. Handles markets independently for each country and adapts product and advertising strategy to local tastes and needs. In this situation, we are really focusing on that market. We're going to change what we need to change in order to be successful. And Nestlé is one that I really wanted to focus on, and specifically Nescafé, in that they will go to different countries around the world and specify certain products. When they expanded into Japan, they tried to adjust to the preferences in order to try to sell them new things. So they had to know the market that well. They knew that Japan is a culture of tea drinkers, and they would like to sell more Nescafé there. And so what they did is they started selling chocolates there, right? This is Nestlé that owns this. Coffee-flavored chocolates to children to develop the flavor for coffee so they could sell more Nescafé. And of course, this all, I know it sounds kind of dastardly, right? But it's, hey, this global management, hey. But the idea is that they've got to know their market really well, and they've got to figure out, like, how am I going to sell this stuff to this market, but I'm going to do it in a very specialized and specific way that we think is going to appeal to certain people. So that's a localization strategy. Then we have a global standardization strategy. I even have the prop here, right? Coca-Cola is a great example of this. But you treat the world as a single global market, you standardize global products and advertising strategies. And the people at Coke insist that it's the same formula, it's the same thing, it's basically the same can, except that it's different in different languages, right? But the design is the same branding, and they just do the same thing everywhere. Now, it was interesting, I was in the Gambia and Senegal, I've been in Turkey, and I could swear that Coke tasted different when I went from one place to another. So I went to the Coca-Cola website today, and they absolutely insist that it's all the same, and it may taste a little bit different because, I don't know, maybe it's been stored differently, or so, I mean, I don't know, whatever it is, or it's paired with food, which may make it taste different, I don't know. But the one thing that was really, the only thing that I guess supposedly is really different is, you know, that it may be in a different language. Like when I was in Egypt, for example, it was in Arabic down the side. So Coke may be lying to you. I think that you could probably still make an argument that even if they are adjusting, that they're still really pursuing a global standardization strategy, that their decision is based probably more on supply chain and availability of certain products as opposed to, oh, we want the white sugar one for this country and we want the corn syrup for this one. You know, my guess is it probably does have more to do with, you know, costs and availability. And that's probably what they would say. Now, I'd love to have some Coke executive here and, you know, put them on the spot, right? It is funny, Guinness insists absolutely the same, is that, you know, they do things exactly in Ireland just like they would every place else. But as for me, having been to Ireland and to the Guinness brewery, it's like there is not a better place to draw a tap of Guinness is right there in the brewery in Dublin. And the Guinness that I'm getting in the United States in a pub doesn't taste the same. What they have said is that, well, that has to do with maybe the quality of the pipes or whether or not the taps are clean and and all this sort of stuff. But, you know, I really don't know. Like I said, they insisted that it's global standardization, but there seems to be a bit more of a bite on that Guinness when you're drinking in the United States as opposed to when you're drinking in Ireland, when it goes down smooth like milk.
I have no idea.
I want New Coke to come back. You're much, much younger than I am, so I will tell you a story there, my child. Back in the 1980s, Coke and Pepsi were in a big brand war for which one's the best, and Pepsi was really pushing it because they were the smaller market competitor and Coke was the big beast to beat, right? But there was still a lot of people drinking both of them, and so Pepsi came up with this gimmick to try to gain more market share, and that was a commercial campaign called Take the Pepsi Challenge. And so they would invite people to go to grocery stores or events or whatever and compare a Coke versus a Pepsi and tell which one they like better. And of course, the commercials were all like, I like Pepsi better, right? Because it's a Pepsi commercial. And what they would actually do is they would make sure that the Pepsi was nice and cold and the Coke was sort of like watered down and warm. And so, it was totally a cooked thing. But it doesn't matter. There was a lot of buzz about this Pepsi challenge, and market share began to change, and Coke's people started worrying that Pepsi was going to overcome them and dominate them. So what they decided to do was create a new formula for Coke that was sweeter and more like Pepsi. And they discontinued the regular Coca-Cola. They said, no more. We're not going to do it this way. We have New Coke, it was called. Can looked a lot like the original one. It had a little silver strip down the side next to a white one, and it was different looking, and it was sweeter. And it came out just about the time that I was a kid going to summer camp. And man, that New Coke tasted good. I thought it was great. Most people hated it, right? They could not sell New Coke fast enough. It was a horrible marketing decision for that company. And it was gone in maybe 3 years. They actually hung on to it for a while, really insisted on it. And then what they did is they didn't phase it out even after 2 or 3 years. They kept it around, but then they brought back the old Coke formula and they called it Coca-Cola Classic. So you had these cans that say Coca-Cola Classic on the side of it, so you could have the old Coke or the new Coke. And it was like, I liked them both, but I was kind of partial to the new Coke. Like, I liked it. I thought it was great. I was so in the minority. Everybody disagreed with me on this. New Coke sucks. No, New Coke is great. And then they got rid of New Coke. So I can't have New Coke anymore, and it makes me sad. So there you go. Another case study in marketing and standardization and specialization and you name it. Okay. So next, let's look at transnational strategy. In this case, we are seeking to balance global efficiencies and local responsiveness and combine standardization and customization for product and advertising strategies. In other words, we're going to do a little bit of both. We're going to do whatever it seems best at the time. And that may seem obvious, like, well, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, because it's more expensive to do things differently. It's more expensive to do the research to figure out what you should do standardize and what you should do customize. There's a lot of process in that. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of research, and so sometimes it's challenging. And so you have large companies that have maximized their footprint by doing that. And there's some that are mentioned here. I'm going to just choose Walmart as an example of this as well. Right? They're clearly interested in global efficiencies, as much standardization as they can possibly get. But at the same time, they are sensitive to what it is they're putting on their shelf. Right? That which might be in demand in Boise, Idaho is going to be different from what is in demand someplace in Central America or wherever they may be. So you have to know what the local demand is, and that means they're having to play both sides. All right, we covered a lot of businesses, a lot of different case studies. We started off talking about Jollibee and McDonald's and some of their competitors. We talked a lot about drink companies. We talked about Coke, Guinness, Pepsi, Nescafé, Starbucks, a whole lot of those. We also talked about other things like Harley Davidson and Apple, McDonald's, Walmart, lots of different kinds of businesses. But they all have similar considerations when it comes to global strategy. One question has to do with standardization versus specialization. Standardization is something that is sort of a low-cost approach. If you make everything the same, it's going to become less expensive. If you specialize, it's more expensive, but you may have that opportunity to capture more markets. The other question has to do with price and cost sensitivity. In your industry, is there a lot of pressure for low prices? Are you running on super tight margins? Or on the other hand, Are you running a business where you can pretty much charge whatever you want to and people still want what you have to offer? So that opens options in terms of how you want to approach global strategy. Well, I hope this has given you a lot to think about. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you get a lot out of it. Once again, please share, subscribe, and hope you have a good day. Catch you next time.